Okay, I hope that this is working. All right, yes, okay, it's got the correct audio device. Awesome. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another book club. We're working on the book Greek Religion by Walter Burkert. Um, and I think I spelled his last name wrong actually on the stream. That's okay. But this week we are doing uh section 4, the special characters of Greek anthropomorphism. And of course, we are wonderfully joined by um Menelaus? Yes? Wait. Greek Mike. Oh, my mic's Greek Mike. Okay. Wait, is your other name Menelaus?
Yes.
Okay,
So
I
my
got
full name is Menelaus, but I go by Greek Mike because it's shorter and easier.
yeah, I like forgot for a second and then I was like, wait, I know this. All right, yes, so of course we are joined with our awesome Greek Mike who actually is going to be leading this because I didn't get to read the parts. So, my bad. But thank you very much for offering to lead the book club today.
Awesome. Happy to
Yay.
lead.
Woo. You can always lead. I don't love always being the leader, by the way.
It depends on my mood. Like last week, I was like really. I think the last time we did this like 2 weeks ago, I was like
Yeah.
really sick, and
Yeah, that's
I was like
right.
coughing, so I was like muting myself every few minutes while I was like dying, and then
Oh, that's funny.
so
Yeah.
leading then was not good, but I am feeling better today, so it
You
was
do.
fine.
You sound good. Oops.
Um,
So at your leisure.
yeah. So do you want me to read, or do you want me to just summarize and go through things?
Summarize and I say go through things. The highlight the bits, and I'm gonna mute myself on. Actually, that's a bad idea. I should mute myself on the Discord. Oh no, because I'm trying to avoid the clacky. I'll just do both. Because I'll take the notes while you're talking.
Awesome.
Yeah, I had to figure out how that was gonna work audio wise because they're two different devices technically. So it was a little, my head was a little laggy on that. All right, I have the notes up.
Awesome. So yeah, so to get started, this is basically talking about how like I think it's really interesting. It starts with saying how it's formerly inclined to regard the world like Olympian gods as something quite unique. Um, but as we learn more about like the Near Eastern, like the Mesopotamian gods, like the Hittite and the Ugaritic gods, um, it's it's really interesting that the pantheon of gods are very anthropomorphic, and they speak and interact like in a very human way. They act like humans, even though they are in fact gods. Um, so there's an assembly of gods, and then they're often paired together. So there's Divine Mother, there's Zeus and Hera paired together. So yeah. Uh, moving on from there.
Hold on, there you go. So, yeah, I see the mention of like all the different the Sumerian gods as you mentioned and the Babylonian. So they're saying that like it's interesting how all of the different deities from different areas all uh, act like humans.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. I you know what? I always did think that was interesting because we assume that the gods look like us, or is it that we look like the gods? You know,
Right,
is it
exactly.
them altering their perception for us?
Right.
Um, I know that there's tons of movies that show like, oh, the angel. If you show the actual form, like people explode or
Right,
something.
exactly.
Yeah. So I guess that's a general deity and divine creature thing. Although not always for the Greeks, I guess.
Right, exactly. And they mentioned also the Egyptians are kind of an exception to this. I
Mm-hmm. Oh
really
yeah.
don't know, other than the fact that like obviously they have like animal heads usually. I don't really know much else that would be kind of an exception. I think they all similarly are related to each other and like uh interact with each other as far as I know. But
Yes,
um
on that, everyone go watch the new Netflix show. Um, Ghost. I can't remember what it is. Oh no. It's about the Egyptian gods. Oh my gosh. It's great and it does real justice to the gods, I think, and how they're portrayed.
right.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I can't find it. I'll put it in the thing later. I'm like, oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
you were saying moving on.
Yeah, moving on. So like um what they were talking about next was like kind of the divine names, and they went into like how the like Roman gods are pretty unambiguous. Like you have like Deus Pater, which is like Godfather, basically, Father God. I don't know what Mercury would mean, and like they say they're intelligible, but they don't really translate them, and I don't know Latin or the Latin roots, so I'm not exactly sure. But like they then go on to talk about like Sumerian gods that are called like Enki Lord, Ninersag, Mistricus of the Mountain. I'm assuming that those are direct translations, um, which I find very interesting. That like their names are basically like almost like titles, whereas with
Yeah.
the Greeks, it's not quite the same thing. It's harder to determine the etymology. Like
Oh, what page are you on? Sorry, ish.
I don't know where I'm like on the second paragraph of section 4 because I don't have the
Oh,
same
okay.
PDF
Sorry.
as you do.
Special.
But
Okay. That I'm in the second paragraph. So what's the first few words of the paragraph?
uh only a more exact differentiation.
Oh yeah, it's exactly the second paragraph. 100%.
Yeah.
Got it. I'm right here. Um, as Despia and Mercury. So you're saying the names are more like titles? Yeah, we
Right,
have a lot of
exactly.
the epithets, like the epithets that we have,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
exactly. And then they have like epithets um and they talk about how like ordinary are oftentimes pretty easy to deduce like what they mean. But you can kind of break them down. So like I'll give you a personal example is like Menelaos like broken up. Menez like withstander or like withholder of, and then Laos is like other people. So similar like Nikolaos is like victor of the people like Nicholas, that name. Um
That is
so
awesome. I love that. That's great. I didn't know that.
but they talk about how some of the heroes though are either encoded, like Agamemnon is kind of like a play on words like admirable or standing firm, but some of them seem inexplicable. Um, and so they're more than just the names themselves. They're basically this says that like the Greek gods are persons, not abstractions, ideas, or concepts. Theos can be a predicate, but a divine name is in the cell is like is tells of the myth and the subject. So like when we experience like Zeus as a storm or Aphrodite as sexuality, um, they say that like Zeus thunders or Aphrodite bestows her gifts. Um, and so like concepts are more important than just like nature deities, like a river stream or something like that.
Uh, yeah, I'm seeing that here, and they go on to talk about Aphrodite as the experience of sexuality, and yeah, I'm here. I'm seeing where you are. Yeah, I feel like a lot of people there's certain things associated with the gods, and it's not just that we associate with them. Like when I go outside, I and for my walk when I'm not getting lost, because I got lost today. Um, when I see the moon, I'm always like, "Hey, Celine," like I actively like this is not just I'm experiencing them. And I know a lot of other worshippers or people who work with Zeus will be like, "Oh, it's raining. Zeus is here." So I totally agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that kind of always, I think that's a really good example of this with Selene, though, like as like the moon is like the other thing to keep in mind when they talk about like gods being concepts as well as just like nature things. It's like you think about the power of the moon and like what the moon represents as like if you think about it like a clock, it represents the day of time, like in a month that passes. You could tell based on the phase, but
Yeah.
also the moon is very important. It controls the tides. Even if the ancients weren't aware of this, they knew the moon was really important, and um, seeing it in the sky was obviously like extremely important for them.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's this giant thing up in the sky, and you're like, what the fuck is that? And we have to remember that when we see the moon, also, the way most of us see it, a lot of people live in metropolitan areas or areas where a lot of places have a lot of light pollution. You have to like actually try to go. And I've actually been out. If anyone, I don't know if you've gone camping, Greek Mike.
Yes,
Yeah, you go out and you're like suddenly you're like holy shit! It's like a giant flashlight in the sky. When we don't have the new moon, of course. Uh,
exactly.
but yeah, can you imagine you just go outside? There's this giant fucking light in the sky, and you're like, oh holy shit, that looks different from the one in the day, in the lighter part of the. I don't know if they called it day, but there's these two giant things in the sky that are affecting you. You feel it, and you know that something that big can't just not affect you or not affect where you are. And even if it doesn't, holy shit, what if it falls? you know?
Exactly.
So they're like, oh my God, like I can totally see that. And even now, I stop in awe of the moon. I think it played I think that a lot of people knew in history that, like you said, it was so vital. And I can just imagine that, yeah, it must have been such a big part of their lives. And of course, we have, my first thought is Demeter and like the harvest and stuff. But yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
Exactly.
we're going to change on how beautiful the moon is.
Yeah. Hey, it's a good tangent. So yeah. So where were we? So yeah. The next up. Uh. Oh, it's actually a really beautiful line I skipped at the end, the last line here. This cannot be defined, but it can be known, and such knowledge can bring joy, help, and salvation, which I think is really important because, like, um, even if it's basically saying like the concept of deity can sometimes be undefinable, like understanding the idea of an immortal being is like really outside of our concept. But any knowledge that we can have can bring us joy, it can bring us help with our personal lives, and it can bring us salvation, whatever that means, essentially.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because we all have like the UPG and shared SPG, yeah, all that, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
we all have our own experiences with the deities, and a lot of times they're individual experiences where, like, oh, I think like for Aphrodite, like she likes this, and I'm like, oh, I think she likes that, and they're there's two very different experiences, and yet we're like, well, we don't know because we're not them, and for all we know, like we're saying, our tiny brains don't, they had to, maybe they had to adapt for our brains. We
Right.
don't
Exactly.
know what they like. We can only go with what we think, and despite not being able to truly understand, it does affect so many of us, obviously. So it
Right.
does kind of blow your mind when you think about it. It's also sweet.
Yeah. Exactly. It is. It's very mind blowing for sure. Um, But what's interesting is when they talk about the way the poets introduce them, they talk about next that they say like basically they're human altogether. So the theology is I mean the theology is very diverse depending on the gods that you get from Homer poetry is
Mm-hmm.
very different than the gods that let's say Plato believed in, or the gods that like the late Platonists believed in, or the Stoics or
Yeah.
whatever philosophy, or even what probably the actual individual villager that worship the gods believed in. Um, but basically, for example, they're not like always omniscient. The gods They traverse vast distances, but they're not everywhere. They're not omnipresent. They'll visit temples, but they're not confined to the temples. They can go anywhere they want. They'll be invisible, but they'll appear if they need to. They'll physically interact with humans. But everything about divinity is very different. Like the gods can suffer, they can be moved, they have emotion, they could be filled with fury and rage, they could be they can be filled with laughter. But of course, at the end of the day, they have this human element, but they're still divine.
Yeah, and it's talking about how like even divine blood is a different sort of blood than human blood. Um and the foods and drinks of the gods are different.
Right.
And yet they're still humanoid. We're gonna go. What's the word that they were saying?
The word is
I think
humanoid. Wait, where's?
no. I'm saying they're still like us, even though they're so
Oh, they're
different.
yeah, they're human. I would say human-like is probably the
Human-like.
best way to.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just copied a bunch of that into the notes. That's great. I think
Yeah.
that's a really nice thing to also say because so that was something that was really important for me when I was discovering Hellenism, or think rather, yeah, when I was discovering different deities and things like that after being like, yeah, it's been a while and like, yeah, Christianity just ain't it for me. So when I was learning stuff, one of the things I loved about the Greek gods was how human they were. They're not, all of them. They're not all powerful. They're not. They each have specialties. Like Hermes can't just throw Zeus's bolts, or he doesn't deal with those. Uh, and they had they had real emotions and interactions, and they were very human. It felt very relatable, and I was like, oh, we're just a smaller version of them. We just can't do as
Right.
much damage like chihuahuas.
Exactly.
We're the
Um,
chihuahuas of the universe. That's kind of dumb. That's funny.
so
Yes.
the next part that's really interesting is they talk about like the gods, the sexuality of the gods, and
Mm.
how
We're all very
um
familiar with that.
yeah, so we're all very familiar with that, and basically they talk about how the children like at least they talk first off about I guess the masculine gods, and so
Mm-hmm.
like how they're the ones that father children. Like they have like sons of Hermes are nimble and roguish. Sons of Heracles are muscular and daring. Zeus is regal. But they're all glorious children.
Yeah.
With goddesses is a little different because, and this is probably very heavily defined at the time, where women were more receptive, passive, and not taking the active part in things. So um, Hera and Aphrodite are probably the most sexual of like the goddesses, but it's very different than there's other like, and they don't mention it here, but you think about like there's the virgin goddesses like Athena,
Mm-hmm.
Hestia, Artemis. Um, and so, but they do bring up Artemis here as being involved with childbirth, which I find interesting because they talk about Leto, like the mother, giving birth to the two of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's see. I'm with you.
yeah,
I found you. Sorry, I was like, oh yeah, I found you.
exactly. Um,
Didn't Leto get turned into whatever a deity?
yeah, she was basically a lesser deity. It sounds like,
Yeah,
but she's
because
important
she
because of who
birthed.
she. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of gods like that. Like if you look into like, if you read like Hesiod's theogony, you'll hear, for example, Hyperion is a god that like is only really important because he fathered Selene, Eos, and
Mm-hmm.
Ilios. So like the sun, the moon, and the dawn. So very important because of who they fathered, but not because of they don't really have mythology surrounding. Like there's no myth of Hyperion that I could think of.
Yeah, it's interesting how some of the kids Some of the kids have more flushed out stories and what we know of them than others. And I wonder honestly why that is.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like some of them just become more famous than their parents. Is happens.
Well, isn't that always the case for children?
The goal.
That's
Um.
the goal. Yep.
Anyway, so moving on from this. So they
So
talk. They next. Yeah.
is it?
Go on.
So next we're going to the but the detached figures. Yeah.
Yeah, but these attached figures are linked nonetheless specific domains and functions in which their influence can be obtained and
Mm-hmm.
experienced. So they talk about the epithets,
Yeah.
um, and how they're personified, and um, like how if you look at hymns and you look at poetry, they have a lot of these epithets on top of the gods, and the epithets really describe the gods. You could think of it like I think people talk about like pray. It's like calling upon like an address fit goals. Like if you're asking me to, like I'm here at book club talking about, my knowledge of Greek history and mythology, not about like my day job where I'm asked about tech and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
exactly, you get different epithets depending.
Yeah, and like we have them actually in like the Minecraft Athena temple when I think Cry built it.
Mhm.
He put a section for each not for, I don't know for all of them, but for some of the different epithets for Athena. Like I know
Right.
there was like a warrior, there was like a weaver, there was like strategy. Yeah, there was like 4 or 5 of them for sure. And yeah, so there's different epithets for different specialties. We'll call them. And they go. It seems like they go through a lot here.
Yeah, they mentioned a bunch of them, and they mentioned how they came about. And so, like,
Oh, that's
some
cool.
of them are fusions of other gods. So, like, you have Poseidon and Erechtheus. I guess Erechtheus is a different god. They did. Athena, Leia, Artemis, or Thea. I don't know these gods, but um, what I'm guessing from this, from the context here, is that there are other deities fused together. Um, the one example I could think of off the top of my head that they don't mention is Rhea Cybele or Cybele. I forget how it's pronounced, but
Hmm.
very common in Asia Minor, I believe, where there was a god like Cybele that became fused or syncretized with Rhea.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
So
So,
that's a really common one.
I think I'm trying to remember. I know that some deities get confused for each other, like the personification, like Artemis and Selene. But they don't necessarily become the same like deity.
Yeah, they don't quite fuse in the same way. It's just that like I think I don't know exactly what the conflation is there. Like from what I remember, like in like early on, it was like Helios was like the sun, and like Apollo was the light, but then it got
Yeah.
conflated with the sun, and Artemis the moon. Um, I've also heard the way I've heard with Selene, Artemis, and Hecate is that like Selene is Artemis in the sky, Artemis is Artemis on Earth, and then Hecate is Artemis in the underworld, and they're all the same goddess, or they're all different forms of the same. I've heard that before.
Yeah. I've heard
I
that
think
before
what
too.
what you choose to believe, I think, is based on like I personally believe them as individual deities, but I think what you choose to believe is based on your own gnosis and like your own
Yeah.
and history, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Whether, how you're considering the historical, because there are some historical stories that we do have to consider, like, okay, this was in this time, and but I think, yeah, mainly on your personal gnosis. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, hold on. So we're going through the different epithets here. Um, and
Yeah, so
I
the next like there's Zeus, Olympios, Apollo, Carnios. Oh, I skipped over the location. So there's the sanctuaries ones, like Pythios, who was the Apollo of Delphi, Apollo Delios, who was Apollo.
mm-hmm.
And I talk about from festivals like Zeus Olympios, who was like the god of basically Zeus in the Olympics.
That's
or
cool.
rituals. Apollo Daphne Phoros, which I'm guessing is Daphne is like the myth is like she's like what should we call it, a nymph that he fell in love with, but I think that's also like I think it's also, but it's like Photos is like bringer, so I'm guessing it's like also used for like I'm curious what that actually means. Let me look it up. Daphne Photos is it's based on a festival. Someone carries an olive branch and like brings it.
Let me
Interesting.
see. That's really cool. What festival? I mean, we
It's
have
called
so
Daphne
many.
Phoria.
I'm like, we have so many. That's cool. I
I
gotta make
didn't know
sure
about
that's in the
this.
calendar.
Interesting.
Oh, speaking of the calendar, and as the fact that you're one of the mods, um, I was I was thinking about doing another calendar this year, and
Yes.
I think that's gonna be really cool for everyone. I just wanted to kind of sneak it in here for anyone who's gonna be catching it later that we are gonna be doing another calendar this year, this coming year. So we have the festival Daphne Foros, and then it talks about Dionysos Omestes.
Yes.
I
And I
say it
don't
right.
know what the yeah, and I don't know what that's epithet is too. Um,
I
looking up
can look it
Omestes,
up
I
while you
find
continue.
apparently it's a genus of insect, which I'm guessing got its name from.
Ew.
That's weird. Anyway, I would say let's look into that a little further later, but
Yeah.
you get the idea.
Yep.
And then they talk about like, um, so like they're also like given titles based on like what what they are. So like Zeus, for example, if you're calling Zeus for rain, you might be Dios or Yetios. For court and property, Herkios or Ctesios as like the guardian of the property. The city is Polievs, protector strangers Dikesios and Xenios. And the god of all Greeks is Panhellenios. So he's like that's when he calls Zeus as like the god of the Greeks. Um, or you have Hera as god of marriage, as um, Poseidon for earthquakes is Asphalios. Apollo for helpers, Epicurios. Um, avoiding evils, Apotrapeos. Um, Polias for Athena for protecting cities, but if you talk about handcrafts, Ergani, or battle, Promachos, or victory, Nike, which is interesting because that's another one where I think there's another goddess there as well. Sometimes it's separated out.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Also, this is great. Like I literally was talking about the other day that I need to write down and find out all the different epithets because I don't have a book or anything that has them.
Yeah, it's tough, and like they're all in ancient Greek, so like some of them I can kind of make out because
Yeah.
ancient Greek has like influenced modern Greek, which I speak, but like I like talk about Artemis Agroter. It's
Well,
like one of
that
the roots you can
that
see in
uh,
that
that
word.
blacked out like you're so there's sometimes when your mic doesn't pick it up or it like skips it like you can't hear. Um,
Oh,
yeah, it's been really like it seemed like only one word or so for but that was like just everything you said about Aphrodite. So,
I said Artemis was
oh sorry, Artemis.
Agrotera for the goddess of the open country, and like you could think about that. It's like agro is like agriculture is like the
Got
same
it.
root.
That's a great way. So like the
Um,
goddess so when it comes to childbirth, I would say it's Lochia cuz like
mhm,
I'm thinking child.
like Lochia, yeah. I don't know what the word like Lochia.
I have no idea. I was just guessing.
Oh, interesting. Well, this is kind of like kind of a icky, but
Oh no.
Lochia is actually the word for post bleeding, which is the
Oh,
blood, mucus, uterine tissue, and other materials that discharge after childbirth.
you're right. I've seen that in person. It's nasty.
It
Um,
is.
it's also terrifying because, like, when I was in the room when my mom gave birth to my little brother, and the doctor just like pushes on her, and just like all this shit comes, and I'm like, oh my god, she's dying. Like I'm like, shouldn't things be inside the body? And I was so confused for like 30 seconds and like freaked out. And I was like, ah. But that makes total sense. And I know some people believe even the different things of it are valuable and you can donate them for science and it's great. So to help potentially save other children's lives. So I think that's perfect for Artemis. And then Demeter, I love it that it's Cathonia.
Yeah, and then they mentioned the same thing, Chthonios for Hermes. They just make it masculine. Or Psychopompos, which is like psychopomp.
Well, here? So I'm confused here. Why? I understand the escorts the dead, but how is that the same as earthly one?
So chthonic, I think, just means like of the earth, or like under the earth.
Oh, I
So
see.
you
So
think about like where you
got it.
point the seeds. Like Demeter is earthly because she's of the earth, and also you could think about the chthonic. Even though she's not a chthonic deity, she's linked to chthonic
Aspects, yeah. Okay.
aspects because of
Yeah,
yeah.
I see. So Oronic is everything above us, and Chthonic is from our feet down.
Right.
Got it.
Exactly.
That and so because of that, because Hermes escorts the dead down, then that's why he's
Yes.
Chthonius. Got it. Got it.
Yeah.
I don't know about the other one.
So a psychopomp is like
Got it.
it's like the root word is like literally the word just in English psycho directly. It's literally taken from it's literally just a guide to it's basically a guide for the dead. It's just a supernatural entity that guides the dead.
Got it.
So there's like if you look at even in modern religion, like examples of this. So like you could think of like I'm looking at I'm just like looking at the Wikipedia page now. They talk like an example of Christianity, like Saint Peter could be considered a psychopomp, or Jesus even could be considered a psychopomp.
Oh, okay.
Depending on like how the Christians like look at it. And there's like, but in Greek mythology, it's generally Hermes that is the one who guides, I guess, to the underworld.
Got it. That it's so interesting that it applies to so many. So they're saying occasionally an epithet will appear on its own. I've seen that, and it's confusing as all hell.
Yeah, it is like because like but sometimes it's like it makes sense. Like if it's like Pallas Athena, like if you just see Pallas, I know it's Athena we're talking about, and like
Yeah, I think that would be the only one that I know, to be honest.
yeah, that's the only one I could think of like offhand. That's like definitely.
I think
Like
if
I would
if I
understand
saw if I saw Cathanos, I would not think of Hermes. I would think chthonic deities in general. Or and like you're saying, there's ways that you could figure it out, but it still would be super confusing. I think everyone also knows Nike. Nike's a good one. Everyone knows Nike. But yeah, they have a lot of names. So let me see here.
Next.
Then we talked about it's Demeter and Hera, and then yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so basically it's very they then say it's funny, the personification of abstract, complicated and much disputed matter, which obviously you can imagine that when you're personifying so many different because the gods represent so many things, like what you're personifying is going to be really complicated just by the nature of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
I was drinking.
And yeah, and so what they're saying here is that I guess it's unclear. Yeah, I guess it's like really unclear that like how they sort of I guess differentiate them because of that. But yeah, what it's talking about here, it's saying like gods are designated as like abstract concepts. It's like a very ancient. That's kind of been going on for forever, where it's like we just basically have a concept and we think of it as divine. And that makes sense. The interesting one I didn't know here was that you mentioned Mithras, who was like Indo-Iranian, eventually spread to the Roman Empire, eventually fell out of favor with Christianity, but had a very widespread cult. Apparently, Mithras just means contract, which is interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Um, but the boundary between name and fluid is like the name and concept is fluid.
Yeah.
Homer seems to like make that clear delineation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so basically what's interesting is that because of that, the personification, they kind of mediate between an individual idea of godhood and a sphere of reality.
Well, what do you mean a
Um,
sphere of reality?
so what that means is that there's a mythical and like a personal element from the gods, and the gods then give part to the conceptual order of. So the gods
Got it.
like
It's a circle. It
it's like a circle. So the gods basically, um, like there's a divine concept, and that divine concept is reflected by reality.
that yeah. Okay, I get it. I got it.
Um, and so this probably happened, and it makes sense. This probably happened in poetry first because people communicate by like verbally. So would have like poems originally would have been spoken and
The more
memorized. And
the more we talk about the gods, the more essentially part of our lives and our realities they become.
exactly. And then even at first they're in poetry, but then they move to visual arts, and eventually that gets the realm of people actually actively worship the gods. Um,
I'm just gonna copy all that. That's very similar to the notion. So my partner asked me this at one time. He's like, "All right, let's get deep here," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, let's go." And he had asked me, "So do you think like the gods just exist on their own, or do they have power from something else?" And one of the things I said is, "Well, I think they just exist, but also I think the more we talk about them, the more they're worshipped, the more power they have, or the more involved they become in our lives." Um, and so this perfectly illustrates that as something that has been thought for apparently a very long time that I didn't know.
exactly.
That's
Um,
brilliant.
and also you have to keep in mind it's like the poets are going to obviously make things poetic. They're going to make
Oh
things
yeah.
so they're going to treat them even though they're anthropomorphic. They're
Hollywood
going to
Hollywood treatment.
exactly. And so like it's funny because like there's certain things that just make sense poetically, like Themis order Metis wisdom become consorts of Zeus, the king god, and then they have daughters like Viki. This and this is really important because order and order like the divine god of course create justice together. Metis, for example, with Zeus created the goddess of wisdom, Athena, and so
Yeah, and we just recently learned about, or I just recently, I think I can't remember if if it was with like book club and stuff or not, but that there's two or three stories of Athena's birth as far as the goddess of wisdom. And yeah, the two stories. There's one where she gets sewn, like Zeus carries her because he shows her mom his true form and she dies. That's the right story, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's the one is like yeah.
yeah, and I thought for the purpose of Athena, I thought that one was really true, and I always thought it was very interesting because that totally explains Athena being, the goddess of wisdom and war as well. And so then we have we're talking about the god of war, and he has fear and terror. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. Phobos and Deimos. So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, so yeah, so like an Aphrodite has Eros and Emeros and Pytho, love, yearning, and persuasion. So like, um, you could see how these are personified concepts that make sense to fit with this main, like their like I'll say parent deity, um, which is and it's interesting because Aphrodite. I find it interesting also because Phobos and their mother is Aphrodite, I'm pretty sure.
Phobos
And
and Dios.
Deimos, yeah, fear and terror.
That's
Because you think about
funny.
war and love. what is you got when you mix the two together? Or you got fear.
Yeah, I mean, we go to war because we get in fights because we're afraid of something. Recently I learned this phrase: anger is not a primary emotion. And so,
Exactly.
if you're angry about something, if you're willing to fight for it, why are you willing to fight for it?
Mhm.
Right? And because usually because we're afraid of something, so that makes total fear. Total that makes fear, totally um, connected because a lot of us try to protect or get upset about our partners, right? Or losing something. And so we're willing to fight for it, right? Like we're willing to fight for our friends, our partners, our families. So that makes total sense that Aphrodite might be the father. I don't understand the terror bit, but that's all Aries.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so then the next thing that's interesting is they talk about how the ancient there were certain ancient cults of apparent personifications in Greece. Eros had a sanctuary. The god was worshipped as a stone, which I
As a
find interesting.
as a stone? Or do you mean like there
Yes,
was a stone statue?
I don't know if it was a statue or if it was literally just a stone that they
Huh.
represented it.
Huh.
Eros, I don't actually know. Let's see. Let's see if maybe Thespiae was an ancient Greek city. I don't know. I have to dig into this. This is probably not going to show up on this one page of Wikipedia.
Oh, no
Um,
worries.
Other than that, they had a festival of Eros. They don't have anything that goes in here. I think I'd have to dig into more. But um,
Yeah, some of the stuff we really have to dig for. It's
yeah.
sad.
What I find interesting though is Nemesis was indignation. They don't. It's funny they have to they translate it, but it's become
Yeah.
an English word. It's just a pull from the Greek. So she was in the 5th century BC, accorded an ancient temple, um, and and basically they talk about a myth about how Zeus pursued her and sired Helen on her will, and then she withdrew in indignation, and she was clearly a Demeter. Um, but it also could be understood in moral terms because it was already next to the Themis, the natural order.
Mm-hmm.
It was erected next to that, and I find it funny because I
Oh wow,
praying
that was a
for
long
righteous
one.
and
Oh, that
patient.
was a long
Yeah.
one. I didn't hear anything what she said. It was just
Oh,
nothing.
what I was saying was it's interesting because I only ever have
I
it's
have a question. Hold on. I have a question. Do you have push to talk on or is it just on?
it's just on.
Huh. Weird.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening.
It's weird. Okay, can you repeat what you just said about the Nemesis cult?
Yeah, so Nemesis, basically it's interesting that they had a temple built next to the Nemesis cult that was to Themis, like just order. So it was
Mm-hmm.
part of the order that if you if you go against the natural order of things, you go against Nemesis, you deal with Nemesis, you get revenge.
Oh, got it. Oh, that's cool. I love that. I love that they put them next to each other. That's perfect. Although I do have questions, about what's the natural order of things, but um and I love how in so many things the deities are paired like that. They're just it just shows that the pantheon oh goodness. The pantheon is full of cooperation. Come on everybody. Let's work together. Oh goodness. Sorry. That just immediately
Yeah.
popped in my head. But I love it. I really, really do. I love how they overlap in a lot of their duties or areas of expertise. And it's one of the, I would say it's one of my top 5 favorite things about worshiping the Greek pantheon. But yeah, and after that, let's see, the divine personalities shaped by poets became problematic. Dum dum dum.
Yeah. So, um, basically the personifications took on a correspondingly greater importance. Um, So like they talk about like how some of them you can't dispute the importance of this phenomena, and like the you can't even though there's no proof of the gods, you can't dispute the importance of the phenomenon. So like for
So people were
example,
like super involved and they were super jiving with the Greek gods, and it just like it became super fucking popular. Is
yeah,
that what they're talking about?
that's what I think that's what it sounds like is that
Yeah.
the other thing I could think of that's like problematic here is that but the personifications of the gods, like what was talked about by Homer, what was talked about by different um like different poets
Mm-hmm.
was what people would believe. So people would believe like whatever whatever
Oh, so
right.
the personification and the opinions, I guess, or the presentation of the deities became only through a certain group of people's reflection or writings of them,
Right.
and so they could write whatever the fuck they wanted.
Right. And then it's weird because they talk about how like they may have like supplanted other existing deities. So like Taiki, for example, because of luck being so important, was considered like the most important
Mm-hmm.
goddess to some people. Um, and it's interesting because I talked about Kibele earlier, but like it became almost competitive with her in some ways.
Yeah.
Um, and so there were eventually statues, altars, and temples that were erected for figures that were even just anthropomorphic like concepts. So you think about things like Irini for peace, Omonia for concord, or even Demokratia, like democracy. Um, but like it's funny, they talk about this as more propaganda than religion. So like um it's kind of funny. They kind of are dismissive of this here, like in the next sentence. They talk about like this happened, but it was basically City is just saying like pray to the goddess of peace and we'll have continued peace. Um yeah, that's what it sounds like. Um and so like as for the earlier period, the Evermore gods were a
Sorry,
matter of course.
I was
That
typing.
break
I
up
was
again?
muted.
Yeah.
And I think I might have muted you for a second too. So if you can just rewind for like 10 seconds, what
Yes.
you're saying.
Yeah, so when we talk about like personified stuff, so like the personification of luck we mentioned was really important. Like with cults, by like the fourth century BC, there were statues, altars, and even temples erected for figures like Irini, which just means peace, or Monia, which means concord, or even Demokratia, which is democracy, obviously. Um, but it's more. They said it's more. They're kind of dismissive of it, like it's more propaganda than religion. They're kind of arbitrary. And there's just a profusion of like, let's say, robed female goddess, like, oh, we're worshiping peace. Um, but it's interesting because it's difficult to understand this in all seriousness. A god is a god in that he reveals himself, but the epiphany of anthropomorphic gods can never be spoken of in anything but a very vestigial sense, as in like, um, so it's basically saying how like the main gods, like the ones that we talk about, are kind of the big ones, but like the anthropomorphic gods that are just like basically the ones that
Personifications of
like
things.
personifications of things. Yeah, they were just basically like vestigial stuff. They were stuff that either existed before the gods or came about as sort of a just conceptual thing.
Hold on, Victoria has to look up words. Okay. So vestigial, in case anyone else needs a vocabulary class, it means it's an adjective, which is why I didn't know what it was, because I never, like, I did not do well with adjectives ever. What we learned is what we were learning through all the streams is that Victoria was not great in school and somehow got a 4.0 average. I have no idea why.
Very
But
nice.
vestigial means forming a very small remnant of something that was once much larger or more noticeable. So yeah, it's downplaying like Uranus or Gaia. Like these are personifications of like the earth and the sky, And yeah, I agree with you. These are massive things. I would be very scared if like the sky started speaking to me. That would be terrifying. Like it does downplay them. That's lame.
Yeah.
And that's, you were talking about how some gods got more popular really fast. And my still thought is I think Aphrodite might be the most popular deity, in my opinion.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as far as like, I always want to do like a survey and figure out like which goddess and goddesses like do people kind of worship the most. Like,
I know, I want to do
um,
that too. We should totally do it.
because it's like, but I feel like in my personal practice, like, I kind of go back. I kind of like wade between like who I pray to in terms of stuff, and like Aphrodite definitely comes up a lot. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I feel like Aphrodite does come up a lot. And I would also love to. That seems like a really fun idea. For maybe the new year. For something
yeah.
we'll do on the Discord server, exclusively on the Discord server. So where's the chat? Where did I put this? Hold on. Exclamation Discord. There we go.
Yeah.
Gotta do the plugs. So yes, please continue. They're talking about Demeter and Dionysus next. So
Yeah,
I
they're
love
talking
them.
about god masks. Yeah, we love them both. But yeah, they talk about different like as part of mystery cults, they would wear masks to the gods.
Yeah.
And and I guess they're talking here in this paragraph really about how like um different cults, different things would be considered as like proclaiming that the god themselves would be reaching into the city. Um
Yeah. I love that
so
I
like
love that this book goes into detail about the ceremonies and what the practice is, because this is super cool.
yeah, exactly. And so like the king who like Solomon, and then they talk about like at the same time it was said that certain like basically like there was a woman called Phi from Phyane who played the part of a goddess. So Herodotus regards the whole business as like a foolish spectacle. It was just like a scene that people did. Um, and then someone else, the king who prayed himself as Zeus, tried to imitate thunder and lightning, is regarded as a femur. And they talk about other examples of just like the followers of Pythagoras claiming that their master was the Hyperborean Apollo, which I find interesting. Um, Yeah, and it's
So
interesting how they talk about different people claiming to be the gods themselves, which I find kind of fascinating that happened.
I'm wondering if it's more like a possession kind of thing. Uh Something like that. Like
Yeah,
a
kind
talking
of.
through somebody. Again, they might show up and it might blow our brains. So
Yeah. And they talk about like how they're figurative the next paragraph talks like they're basically figurative representations. So
oh
therefore
yeah,
like so like um
I see that, like a Psyche
so basically
costume.
like some of the most glorious works of art, the artist's name was known. So like it was basically like they were the statues were showpieces of how beautiful the artisans were, not necessarily revelation.
Got it. Not necessarily a perfect representation of something that happened or anything with the mythology and the gods. It's just a like a tribute almost.
Right, exactly. Um, but yeah. So
I
but
love
then
that.
they mentioned
Sorry, I was gonna say I love that they mentioned like I said, the procedure of like the person swearing the oath is required to clothe himself in Demeter's purple rose and like robe, and like do this with the hands. I love that. I know we don't have a lot of what happened in the cults and the mystery cults, but what we do have always seems so meticulous, and again almost like a tribute. Like everything they do is so important, which really contradicts the how the artists do their work.
right,
Contradicts?
exactly.
Juxtapositions. The word I love. So yeah, the encounters between gods and men.
Yeah, so encounters between gods and men. So they talk about how it's interesting. This in Ethiopians, gods feast with men, and then on the other end of the world, in the Hyperboreans, Apollo lives among them. And then otherwise, it is just like the poets basically describe things. So like Poseidon leading a battle array, but the warriors hear at most the voice that they see Poseidon leading the
Mm-hmm.
battle. Um, Usually the god will take the shape of a friend.
Yep, there you
Um,
go.
and it's only like the way the event works that show like, oh, the god actually moved them. Or the god reveals himself by some token. So like Aphrodite, but she's recognized by her throat, her desirable breasts, and sparkling eyes.
I
Which is
love that the
funny.
first thing that they mention is her beautiful throat. I love
Yeah.
this. I love this because I love my collarbones. And like I genuinely collarbones. So I love that they mentioned the beautiful throat and then the desirable breasts. It goes to show um, we can learn some things from the
Yeah, exactly.
let's value some interesting parts. No, that's great though. I love that it's and her sparkling eyes. It's a brilliant representation, just as we're talking about how the poets describe her or describe the gods. That's how we recognize them.
Yeah, exactly. And they talk about like different ways in which this happens. So like
Mm-hmm.
after like Aphrodite lays with Anchises, she rises from the couch and reveals herself all her immortal beauty, like shines forth from her cheeks. Um, or like Achilles recognizing Athena by the light in her eyes. Or
Mm-hmm.
even how Demeter, when she came to Alcestis, like she was an old servant woman, but she filled the room with a divine radiance, and
Mm-hmm.
that like basically is what showed that she was divine.
Also, apparently, she's fucking tall as shit. Her head reaches to the roof of the palace, and she fills the doorway with divine radiance. So I'm just saying, it seems like she was really tall. That's interesting. I'm wondering what that I think that was the wasn't that the story of Demeter looking for Persephone? Or no, is that
Yeah,
a different
exactly.
story?
I think it's the same one. I don't know though.
Yeah, but I love it because she turns herself or portrays herself in the shape of an old servant woman. Um and so she's like we're saying the gods are like they turn to friends and stuff. They take a form that we can maybe handle and also not be terrified of. Like it's a friendly face. Um but then they can it seems they can also reveal their true forms and maybe we don't explode.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. Or like there's little like ways that you can think that you're talking to a god. So,
Mhm.
um,
I mean, and
but
that's the thing.
next,
We get the question all the time in the server about how do I know it's so and so? I think and half the time the answer is you just know. Like there are signs and things that we associate with the goddesses or gods. But half the time it's like there's no full way. We just try to look for like it was saying the sparkling in their eyes, the chariot drawn by birds, flashes of lightning that identify that can be associated with them, but you don't really know for
yeah,
sure.
exactly. I think it's interesting that they talk about they go on to talk about Sappho specifically,
Yeah.
and she talks about if you read her poetry, it sounds like she actually met the gods. Like she basically really sounds like she like met them specifically. And she talks about Aphrodite descending from heaven on a chariot drawn by birds. Um, and yeah, it's basically like heavenly house, the divine chariot. This is very much like poetic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she's called on to pour out nectar and mix with festal joys at her festival. Um, and they talk about how like a battle, a warrior may pray for like Athena to stand beside the victors in the battle. Um, and that has led to like turning points in like really important wars that like the
Mm-hmm.
Greeks viewed as them having. Um,
Had help. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Divine assistance.
Right.
So I have a question for you. Have you ever, seen or had a vision of a deity?
Yes, but like only while like meditating, and so like it felt
Yeah.
like I was then like in a state where I was able to like perceive things. And so like I've had like visions or I've heard like I've like experienced like God phoning, which I personally think you're subconscious, but I
Wait, so
think
I don't
it's very
actually know
interesting.
what God phoning is.
So basically people like what I am very skeptical of it as a it's basically you communicate with the deity in your mind and you
Oh.
can but if you do it while like meditating, it's really interesting because you could do this like with guided meditations, like where you basically meet your spirit guides. What basically happens is like your brain essentially will have like almost like an internal AI that like will communicate with you. So like I don't know.
Yeah, what is it? Eckhart Tolle? Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah,
Eckhart Tolle
exactly.
describes it in his book, The Power of Now, as being conscious, because we're stuck in this unconscious world that's trying to distract us with all of the earthly crap, and you can get to a state of like unconsciousness as and being more connected with the divine. Um, so yeah, I'm following you here. And so what is it called when the gods just yell at you randomly?
I don't know.
Because okay, one of my favorite experiences was because I like jars and stuff. So my partner gives me, he's like, oh, I had this really cool bottle from tequila, and it's a really cool jug and everything. He's like, I didn't come out to throw it out. It's really pretty. I was trying to figure out to do something with it. He thought he's like, I thought you might like it, and I'm like, oh yeah, this will be great. And like, I swear to God, or whatever, to gods, I suddenly hear mine, and I'm like, fuck, it's Dio. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like sometimes that happens to me, and I'm like, oh, all right. But so that's not God phoning.
Yeah, it's not quite God like it's literally like
God
you have a
phoning's
conversation and
I
it's like
see.
you have to be like in a right I think the right state of mind for it. I don't think people like I don't know. I think it's also I think it's a very complicated thing and I think most
Yeah,
people like don't really like I don't think you can really take it with you take it with a grain of salt because it's like literally your mind creating
yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah, totally. And
Um
yeah, I don't feel like that's God phoning either. I feel like that's more working with a deity, I
yeah,
guess. Um,
that's what I like to think of it as.
yeah, or listening to. Because it's not like it goes back and forth. Like I think I'm understanding what you're saying is it's on purpose. It's getting in the state where that you can communicate back. Um, because the gods can yell at us or get our attention in a variety of ways. So yeah, we were praying to like a god, and they would like Athena would like manifest and stand by the victors, as you were saying.
Right, exactly.
And then it looks like they also go into Zeus as well. Pindar's poetry. Um,
Right.
yeah,
But
connect.
it's basically saying direct interventions confined to mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's a splendor that's sent by the gods. So like any like sort of like the gods don't interfere, but they bring you victory still, which is kind of an interesting concept, I guess.
Yeah, and I think so. There's one of the alphabet stones, the Greek alphabet stones, that basically it says like ask Apollo for help. Like if you ask for help, you'll get help. And then there's another one. I can just look for it, and I think these apply so very well. And it's also um, the alphabet. I apparently can't talk and type at the same time. Um, it's also a very good representation of this. Like they'll help you, you know, but they're not doing everything. Like it said, like it may be hinted. Let me see. But there's another one that basically says, the gods aren't gonna do it for you, honey. Get up and move your ass. You can get help, but like,
Yeah.
it says it much more concisely and nicer. But I'm not gonna make everyone wait for me to look that up. Yeah. So that totally makes sense with other things that I found with Hellenism.
Yeah, exactly.
I like.
Um,
Yeah. Please continue.
no, what are you gonna say we like?
Oh, I was gonna say, just like we were saying, they're not easy to destroy, but they're also not undestroyable. So the gods exist, but they cannot be harnessed to the ends of man. Like we can't affect them like that. And it even says that they laugh at us. Or sorry, we laugh at them. They seem familiar in their humanity. Yeah, that's what I said earlier, right? That they seemed very human and relatable to me. So, I really like this bit because of that.
Yeah. Um, it's funny because they say like at the end of the day that everyone knows theater, Zeus never really appeared. So like, yeah, it's all theater.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I
And
went ahead of
there's
you.
it's all good. They talk about cults with like, basically normal sacrificial cults, a cult without revelation, without a, which is, I think they don't really touch on it. They talk about the miracle that happened, miracle,
Mm-hmm.
um, but they're just satisfied with the radiant splendor of the sacrificial fire, um, and the beauty of like those around the altar and stuff like that. So it's interesting that it's without revelation and without epiphany. So very different than other faiths where they're very much there someone like a prophet revealed something. Like that doesn't
Yeah.
happen here. There's no prophet of Hellenism.
Wait, wasn't there some guy who um, well, I mean, we have the Oracle of Delphi. Is that not are they not a prophet?
Not quite. Not like in the same way like someone like Muhammad would be considered a prophet, for example.
So they're not. I see. They're not. Well, yeah, I don't understand the difference.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't. It's very nuanced. So basically, like I mean,
yeah, I
the
think
oracle
so.
like communicates with the god and makes predictions, but they're not revelatory. Like um they don't really reveal like I don't it's not they don't reveal concepts about the god.
Got it. Yeah, I'm looking at. It says that a person regarded as an inspired teacher or proclaimer of the will of a god, and then oracle is defined a priest or priestess acting as a medium through whom advice or profit was sought. So one is like just talking about them, and the other one's actively being their voice. Got it. I think we don't
Right.
have someone like that. Um, yeah. So yeah, please continue beyond my lacking of English language.
No worries. So it's funny because like they talk about the gods exist. They definitely like they do, but they're not harnessed to the ends of man. So like
Mm-hmm.
well, the way I see that is like you can't. There's always the phrase that you hear tossed around a lot by people, and I think a lot of times where I've heard it used, I think it makes sense in some contexts, but I think it was also used to kind of like denounce witchcraft, which doesn't really make much sense. But the idea was like the Fae are not vending machines. Like
Mm-hmm.
they don't just you can pray to them, you can work with them, but they don't just like you don't just make a sacrifice and then get like rewarded right away. It's not how it works.
Well, yeah, and we see a lot. That's another question we get a lot on the Discord server. Is like, can I ask them? Is this like a trade, basically, in some way or form? The question, and we do have to remember one of my, I think one of my favorite of the pillars of Hellenism. I believe it's charis. Uh, give
Yep.
without sorry.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Thank you. Give without expectation of receiving anything in return. You give for giving, not for getting something back. That's obviously not put into the area of commerce. So we're talking about beyond commerce, and especially with the divine. Yeah, I've heard bad things about accidentally making deals with Fae. So maybe don't.
Yeah.
They may
Um.
not like this tit for tat idea.
Yeah, it's funny because it says like they could even be laughed at. Like you could even, which is it seems like blasphemy to me, but it shows how they're familiar, and you can make. I guess it makes we can make jokes about like Zeus being horny or Dionysos being drunk or whatever people want to make jokes about. But it says like they remain distant in a sense they're like a contrast to men because the big line there, the big dividing is more.
Sorry. Hold on. Wait a second. Whatever's going on. Okay, can you say that again? Let's try it. Because it was like so choppy.
So I said was that like the line between gods and death. Mortals
Yeah.
obviously end their life and that's it. Whereas the gods are deathless. They were born, but they don't have an end. They don't die. Um, but they don't have so because of that, the gods they may have, but um, they don't necessarily have the risk of death that humans have.
Yeah,
So like
I was about to ask. I'm like, didn't some of them die though? Like
not quite.
supposedly.
I've heard like so the one thing I did hear was like I don't even remember where this
This
was. Like I
battle
literally
between
heard
like
like
Hera, right?
yeah, I don't know if that like cuz I didn't think the gods died. I thought like the Titans were locked in Tartarus then came out and they're like they were freed
Fucked up
eventually.
shit. Yeah.
But like the other one is like I remember hearing a story about Pan dying or something and like it being a thing in Italy or like what was modern day Italy like where
Yes.
there was a funeral, but I don't know anything about that.
I've heard something about Pan dying too. Recently. It must have been while I was reading my book. Um, not this book, another book. But yeah, I've heard that too. Obviously it's a heck of a lot harder to hurt a god. You're not just gonna go and like stab stab. That ain't gonna work. It's probably something really fucking special. If you can kill a god at all. I think they'll maybe like
Right.
time lords. They just evolve. Was that do
Yeah,
you watch Doctor
exactly.
Who?
I have watched Doctor Who.
Yeah. Nerd fist bump.
Mhm.
Yeah, so exactly. There might be some, but generally they don't seem to die. And we do call them
Yeah,
the deathless gods.
right. It's interesting because like it's funny in the last decisive extremity, the gods abandon man. So like Apollo leaves Hector as the scale tips. Artemis bids farewell to Hippolytus. Um, so they can't rescue all of humans, but they I guess pick sides with some. I don't know.
I think it says they can't rescue. It's let me see here. It would be a grievous matter to rescue all the race and offspring of men, and so the gods save none. So basically, you know what? It's all you guys. Have fun for a few thousand years. Realize that we're cool again. Come crawling back. um. So yeah, it's a really interesting that they say like, oh, okay, we're gonna peace out for a bit. Um,
Yeah.
and let's see,
So
completely suppressed in Greek mythology. Yeah, continue. Sorry.
this next paragraph is actually super interesting because it really shows the differentiation, and I think for a good reason. I think there's some good to be pulled from that. Is that they don't really talk about in Greek mythology like the creation of man by the gods, whereas like you compare that to the very obvious Genesis, the Old Testament, where the whole entire goal of creation is God eventually makes humans and humans worship God. Um, and that happens even in the Babylonian creation epic. It's probably not a coincidence that probably influenced the Old Testament. But in Hesiod's Theogony, he basically passes over the creation. He just talks about how the gods were created.
Yeah.
Humans are separate. There's other fables which talk about Prometheus
Yep.
or like Titans creating God. Like, but in general, gods and men, they're separated just by a sacrificial ritual, and like the relationship is built through Hades. Um, so they're a type and an antitype, but they're not necessarily like humans weren't created to worship the gods. Humans choose to worship the gods because of the
Yes.
benefits that they get from worshiping and being like the gods.
Well, I think the tone here is really what's important. The fact that in like the Old Testament, um, it the story of the creation of mankind is within Christianity and Catholic, and a lot of them I assume. I've only had experience with Christian, but the story of how humans became, how man became, is like drummed into you as like you were created by the gods, and and it says the gods to create mankind to be at their service, and we don't do that. Like we just whoosh, like you said, like Hestia just skips over it like it's nothing. um and I think the tone there is important, as that mankind being of service to the gods versus work with, practice with them to, like as you said, betterment of mankind. I have heard also, I just recently read the story of Prometheus creating mankind. I've also heard one where Zeus does it, but I wouldn't be able to produce a source on that one.
Right.
Um,
Exact. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Um, and the other thing I was going to say, this is totally off topic, and not totally off topic, but like the one thing I kind of like about them not talking about like how the gods created man is that like you could think about like the birth of the gods and whatever as concepts and ideas and
Mm-hmm.
you know powers of nature as being part of the universe and very much like interacting with the universe.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very good scientifically because you're not like bound to a myth. You're not bound to like
Yeah.
the creation myth, and like obviously this is not like I think the best example we talk about the Old Testament here is like, and this is not true of all Christians, but true of a large subset where, and
Yeah.
I should say a large vocal subset where they believe the Old Testament is literal, that
Yep.
evolution is therefore a lie, and you ignore all of science. Whereas I think Hellenism is very scientific, and it's very
Oh
much
yeah, I think we have
in
literally like a
favor of
couple gods
science.
of that, right? Don't we? Like
Oh, absolutely,
Asclepios? The god, isn't he god of like
exactly.
healing? Or I don't know his particular off the top of my head. But yeah, I you know what? I didn't think of that, and that's fucking brilliant. I love it. Because yeah, it does leave room, and we do have also I mean, we have Athena, like goddess of wisdom. Like we learn things about our world, and it does leave room for our existence as evolution as well. Yeah, I love it. I never thought about it that way. That's a great way to think about it.
Right. So next paragraph, gods cannot give life, but they can destroy it.
Boom
So it's
shakalaka.
interesting. It's like there's no devil, there's no in nature. God has got a dark and a dangerous side. So Athena and
Yes.
Hera, they're city goddesses par excellence, but they were hell bent on destroying Troy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like you have Apollo, who's a healing god who all plagues. Artemis destroys the children of Niobe. Um, like Athena entices Hector to his death. Aphrodite cruelly destroys Hippolytus. Um, it's a theme in the Homeric epic that there's no god more. So it's talking about the gods have a very, they don't give people life, but they destroy it. They can
Yeah.
obviously kill, they can obviously damage, and they can obviously tip the scales against humans.
Well,
Um,
I mean, that's like, like boxing. If you're in a lower weight class and some guy comes up to you and they're in a much higher weight class, they have bigger power, more strength, they're going to kick your ass.
Right.
I mean, the gods by comparison. I mean, shit. Zeus catches thunderbolts for fun. Like, they're gonna kick our asses if they want to, and other people's asses. So,
Exactly. And it's interesting because the next paragraph talks about how even though the gods destroy, like, Artemis demanding life of Iphigenia, Apollo bringing death to Linos, Hyacinthus, Neoptolemus, Athena destroying Eudema, and Poseidon striking out. The figure killed is then preserved in a divine domain, a dark reflection of that god.
oh
And
yeah,
so I think the best example, the one that I think about the most, is probably Hyacinthus, like Hyacinth, where people really revere Hyacinth, even though Apollo killed him. But it's interesting because we revere him to understand the power of God, even though gods have a lot of like brilliant light that they bring and stuff like that.
I wonder about the idea of a death of a god. Is it more of a death, or is it more of a you're
Well,
fired?
it's death of a mortal, and it's basically the death of the mortal then reflects
Oh
some
yeah,
dark aspect of the god.
got it, got it. You know what, that makes me think of Arachne.
Yeah.
I think that's a really common story. Um, that and I mean that's I agree with that, but also, on the mortal note, we shouldn't judge people on their worst days.
Exactly. Um,
They're more than that. I mean, obviously, that's
they're
what
more
this whole
than
thing is talking about, that the gods are super fucking complex.
yeah. Um,
If you want, by the way, actually, we probably should. It is 8 o'clock, so we've been going for like an hour and a half.
ooh,
Yeah, it just flies by when you're getting all
yeah, I didn't
having
even
fun.
notice how late it
I
was.
know.
We've got like two paragraphs left of this section, so maybe
Oh,
we'll
do
just
we? Oh,
finish
yeah,
this
let's
off.
just finish it off. I didn't realize that. Yeah.
And the next one that we talk about is funny because they talk about so basically this, to wrap it up a little bit,
Hades!
like Hades comes up, and so the idea is that like the way that gods need men is different than the way humans need gods. Where
There's a
basically
typo.
TT is good to give fitting gifts to the immortals. They will
What
show
the?
their gratitude.
What is
But it's not
TT?
a certainty. I think it's supposed to be it is good.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
they like will show their gratitude, but you can't count on it as certain. So like
That's right.
you could you can obviously pray to Aphrodite that you're gonna find love or whatever, but you can't. Um, Now you can make, um, you give the gifts so you basically need to give the gifts not expecting anything in
Yeah.
return.
Well,
Because the
also,
gods can.
sometimes what we get in return, we don't understand. Um,
Exactly.
you could pray to Aphrodite for love, and you might have to go through one or two relationships before you're ready to receive that. So it'd be like, okay, we're gonna train, and then if that's the case and you're having a bad relationship, you'd be like, why aren't I? I'm praying. Why aren't I getting it? I think we had that as a
Exactly.
recent couple questions in the server too, and we had to explain
Yeah.
Kais.
Yeah, and it's like you got to build it, but also like they can't. It's you're not gonna get everything that you want.
Yeah.
And like, the thing is like, so for example, like when the Cains made sacrifices to rid the plague, Paul hears the prayer and the plague goes away. But when the Achaeans make sacrifice to the gods, they march to battle. They were summoned to join in a dream that they was sent by Zeus. Dreams are really important, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But the battle becomes harder to win, even though the
Mm-hmm.
battle was like led by Zeus. And then you have the example of like in Troy, they prayed
Yeah.
to Athena, but she turned away her head and like, the city fell. And so there's nothing you can really do. Like, you can never be entirely sure of the god, but you do it because you build that relationship with them, and you want
Yeah.
to have that cycle of reciprocity. What I think with people who like practice and notice that like when they make offerings, they get stuff in return. It may not be necessarily like I make an offering and then I get like something You know what I mean? It's not like, again, it's not a vending machine. You don't put in money
Yeah, you're
out.
asking favors here, don't bite the hand that feeds you, and also don't, always expect it. You're asking favors,
Exactly.
you know.
So the last paragraph here talks about the gods do not hold the world well molded figures to be viewed from various angles. So basically the gods, even though they interact with the world, they're distant in a way, but they're far shooting.
Yeah.
Um and so this basically what's nice with this is that this gives men the freedom to
Mm-hmm.
spell. You're not forced to always worship the gods. You could turn away and say, no, I don't want to do this.
And
Um
nothing bad will happen to you.
exactly. Like you
You're
don't have
not
the fear of
required.
hell where if you don't worship, make offerings at a certain time of day every day, go to that. There's no concept of that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that was also one of the things that I liked about Hellenism. It was like yo, if you're gonna be here, you're gonna be here. If you're not, you're not. We're good without you.
right, exactly.
um, and I like that, and I think based on a lot of the myths and stuff, like we're talking about Prometheus and such, uh, man, humans have become, like I said, the gods stand at a distance, you know.
Right.
So they're not 100% involved, hence also asking favors. Um, but there's nothing, they don't care if you worship them or not. If you want to
Right.
join, and I think that's very important, that it's a you can come or you can go, and it's completely your choice, and there's no pressure, and it was such a welcoming feeling for me. I thought that this was a really important part of Hellenism to me, that it's completely voluntary, and it very much shows that,
Yeah.
because people
Um,
can be dicks about the gods, like Arachne, like we just talked about.
yeah.
Then maybe shit happens.
So one interesting thing to point out is that only rarely despota, which is like the word a slave uses for an owner. So
Mm-hmm.
very different
I've
than
never heard it,
theologically some
actually.
other faiths where yeah, I've never ever heard it or seen it. I mean obviously the word despot is not
Mm-hmm.
like English, it's a word that like led to an English word. But you wouldn't think of the gods as despots because
No. Yeah.
even though like Zeus is king, you don't have like he doesn't have like you don't have to follow the gods. The gods don't care. You make your offerings to develop hobbies. You don't do it because you need to.
Yeah, so
Um
here despot is a noun. I looked it up. It says a ruler or other person who holds absolute power, typically one who exercises it in a cruel or oppressive way. And so that's what we're talking about. Where there's no punishment for not worshiping them.
exactly. But what's interesting is, and I'll read the last two sentences here, is
Mm-hmm.
like this is a kind of freedom and spirituality brought at the price of security and trust. But reality imposes limits even on man and his freedom. So you have it's very interesting. Like
Oh, you're cutting off so badly. Say it again. It's very interesting.
it's very interesting because there's a lot of freedom to this spirituality where you can worship as you please, you can worship the gods you please, you make the offerings you please, and really like you can't go wrong per se. I mean, obviously you should follow
That is a
formula,
big,
but
big topic. We get that a lot in the server of like, is this okay if I put this out for so and so? And exactly, it's customizable, as you're saying.
yeah, the drawback is you don't get the security and the trust that you don't have like I
Guarantee.
guess like the same guarantee that like someone has if say I guess like and this is obviously different depending on the sect of like Christianity, but I guess the best example is like
They're the
you hear
top
from
dog,
like
so.
Protestants is that like you hear like from like some people that like oh I believe in Jesus, I don't have to worry about I'm not afraid of death because I'm going to heaven, and like you have that security and that, but you don't have the freedom of spirituality. You're forced to practice or you will be punished.
Yeah.
So it's very different. It's a very different in terms of how you kind of spiritually look at things.
Yeah.
Um,
And
but
that's
the
not
thing
to
is
say
that
that people in these various faiths don't look at it as I just believe myself and that's enough. Because that's
right.
totally, there are people who believe that, but I think the
Oh, absolutely.
rhetoric is pushed
Yeah.
that if you don't do this, then you are not, going to be rewarded with a good afterlife, or bad things will happen to you, you know.
Yeah. And this is obviously varies depending on like sect and
Mm-hmm.
level of like worship, obviously. But
But it
in
is very
Hellenism, there isn't
popular.
really of that. Yeah.
It's very popular trope, if I can call it a trope.
Exactly, and it's something that I think is worth like comparing, but I don't think it's. I think it's like I prefer the. I like the idea of having, um, the freedom to be spiritual, but also not to feel like I don't have the fear of sin. You don't have that fear that like I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing a bad thing, I'm doing bad, I'm gonna get punished. But you do have to know the reality that like the gods are always stronger than you. You
Yeah,
are always below the gods, but accepting that is not a hard thing to accept, in my opinion. It's just that
I
like
agree.
reality just imposed on the freedom of man, and that you're not allowed to be hubristic.
If I may, I think a really great example of this, if I may be a total fucking nerd, is uh from Star Trek, Captain Picard and Q, which is also, it's very new. There's a new series, a new season of Picard, which involves Q. But we see throughout the entire relationship of Picard and Q, they understand that Q is definitely more powerful than them, and like by leaps and bounds. They are nothing, and even Picard understands that, and even says it a few times, if I'm not in those so many words, but they understand that, but he's still talking to Q like a regular fucking person and like challenging him.
Exactly.
And so I think that's like the really good example of this. And I agree. I do think that it's, we walk our own lives, but you know, there are things that affect us in ways we don't know. And our lives in ways that we may not know or understand. But, maybe also no one's there. And
Yeah.
there's no real way to know for sure. Like 100%.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, I love this. I love these last two sentences. Did I copy it out? I think I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
These
Do
are
it.
great.
I
That's a
like it
great
a
way to
lot.
end it. Yeah, I think it's very eloquent.
Yeah. I definitely like it. I think like again, like for me, I'm very big on who wants to not do whatever I want, but like I want to be able
The
to
option.
the option to do what's right and like be able to. So like for me, that's a huge factor. Is that like I don't have to make an offering every night at a certain time, but I feel good when I do it. I feel good when I do a ritual. I feel good when I talk about things that are practiced in any way.
Yes. Yes, I actually I have a cup set up with a candle and a pretty bowl, in my kitchen, and I've been trying, not necessarily always succeeding, to when I make my little tiny pot of tea in the morning, because I have to have two cups, because I'm a tea addict. I try to pour the first one out in this, almost like a tiny like cappuccino cup, that has like Greek pictures and stuff on it, out for Hestia and like the candle and stuff. And I don't always get to do it. In fact, most of the time I forget. But when I notice it and I haven't done it, I'm like, "Aw, like I'm disappointed. I don't feel like I'm gonna be punished, but I'm like, oh, I wanted to do that for them, for Hestia, but I
Right.
forgot."
Exactly.
But it does make, like you said, it makes me feel good when I do it. Um,
Right.
and that's why we love everyone on the server.
Hmm.
Because we get to talk to everyone every day about the stuff that we care about, and whether it's Hellenism or not. Wasn't it you who asked for a sports channel?
I did. So it's really funny because like the end of September, early October, I had like I guess like where I got like really into sports again for a bit, and I was like because I was doing fantasy football and like baseball, I started to get really into like the playoffs, and
Mm-hmm.
then like the Yankees ate shit, and I like did really bad in fantasy football leagues, both of them. So I just like stopped caring a little bit. But I do post in them some. But I did want it. I didn't know if people like it, but
I don't know, but we
it's
can. I
fun. We
mean,
talk
we
about
can
different
post
things.
announcements if there's a game. I don't know this stuff. I don't do sports, so maybe we can recruit a sports person.
World Cup is coming
Oh,
up, so
oh,
maybe
sorry.
that'll be good.
Sinwin commented. I didn't even pay attention. Yeah, we're learning good knowledge today. It was really cool. We learned a lot of little things about the gods. Um,
Yeah,
I actually liked that a
I'm
lot. That
glad.
was like really good. Um, that was really interesting. There's just these little bits that I never like. Most of them I didn't really think of before. I've thought of the epithets, and obviously we did the Pillars of Hellenism streams a while ago. So of course we're talking about Charis, which is probably one of my favorite pillars. Um, there was a bit in here about giving, and I was gonna mention Saturnalia. That's what I was gonna mention. Uh,
Yes.
so I am going to, because I just do things and don't consult the other mods like an asshole. Sorry. Um, I was wondering. I was thinking about doing a Saturnalia. I don't know what. I don't remember what I call it. Saturnalia Secret Santa or whatever.
Right.
Um, so I was gonna post in the announcements to see if anyone wants to do it and how many people would be interested. So if you are interested, um, go in the Discord and make sure you check the announcements channel. If we don't have enough people to figure out how to do it, then we won't. But I just thought it'd be really cool. And I can't remember what portion of the talk it relates to, but that's an announcement. Um, did you have anything to say about the rest of the stuff before I continue to make announcements?
No, keep
Annalise?
making announcements.
Okay, so um another announcement that's happening today is the Minecraft server was hacked really badly last time. Well, not really badly, but pretty badly. I only recently got access back to it inside. Thank you to our amazing Minecraft mods, Nathan and Melissa. You can find them both on the server and then, say hi. Um, and so I will tell everyone that the damage is not bad. And a majority of it seemed like the protections that I put on the temples were okay. They did hold. Except for one that I didn't realize wasn't protected, and sadly it was Demeter's. So I don't remember. I'm gonna look it up and see if they're still on the server. But if you want to help build it, we are going to allow a limited number of people who we have reputations to assist in fixing it. The damage is not bad. We did not need to roll it back, and we are now instituting a whitelist. So that's sad. But that means that we're not going to be streaming until it's fixed. You know what? I thought the same thing. I was like, ooh, mama gonna be mad. But, yeah, I think, I was surprised because I swear that I fixed it. But, because I also built some, like a goat pen or something, or, next to it. But yeah, the damage is not bad. In fact, even a majority, I think, of Demeter's temple is still intact. And yes, we're going to institute things, but that means until we get it fixed, the Minecraft streams are gonna not happen because I don't want to show that to people because I'm sure it might be upsetting. I was very upset. um,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but I will still be playing, and we're gonna fix it. So, yeah, and we are always looking for volunteers. We have several positions that we need assistance with, and due to, of course, lives being a little complicated, having additional volunteers for anything, all you have to do is go into the Discord and look at the positions channel. And if you're feeling charitable with your time, we'd love to have some more volunteers to help with posts, with activities. So, and always thank you so much, Menelaus, and always a big thank to all of our mods and people who participate as well.
Thank you.
Well, no, thank you. You led it. You were amazing. I love it.
Fun.
And I love how you went and pulled out the meat of every paragraph. Because that, that helps because it's a long book. So
I'm glad.
thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Cinnamon, for joining as well. I'm going to try to do a highlight so you don't have to watch it like crazy. But I do suggest 2-speed. And I hope that everyone has a blessed, not holiday, best weekend. I'm so in the holiday mind. But has a blessed weekend. And yeah, bye everyone.
Bye.
I have to figure out a better way to end